But first of all, thank you for this opportunity. And what Peter and I are going to try and talk to you today about. Sorry, I'm just trying to go to the next page. Is to introduce ARPANCA and to give you an understanding of the Australian regulatory environment, because we are a commonwealth of states and we also have a federal government, and so the jurisdictional powers change as you move from commonwealth to the states. So we'll talk to you about that a bit, and then how the Australian code structure works within that commonwealth framework, and then talk to you a bit about the ARPANCA medical branch, the services we offer into that code space, and how we also provide radiation protection services in the medical space across Australia. So first off, ARPANCA is an independent regulator. It is created through an Act of Parliament. It reports to the Health Minister, and it uses a risk-informed approach to identify and ensure that licence holders of who report into the Commonwealth space are taking responsibility for the protection of the environment and people of Australia. And that is pretty much the first sentence in the Act which creates ARPANCA. So we are also a health advisor because we have built and maintained competence and capability in the measurement of radiation and the assessment of health impacts, and that's from laboratory-based measurements in the chemical space, visual ionising radiation using external beams of various sorts, and we're also engaged to a great deal with the professional community in the medical space. Okay, so we provide services. This is an anechoic chamber which is recently installed in ARPANCA. So we do almost the full spectrum of the electromagnetic space. So you can see we go from waves, as in sound waves, all the way up to microwave and into the medical limb accelerator, so megavoltage energy space. And just an example, we initiate, maintain, and promote frameworks for radiation protection and safety. We undertake research in the space, so that informs our frameworks. It also provides services in the regulatory branch, so they have full information and independent evaluation of the things which they might be reviewing. We also see, to ensure, sorry about that, the regulation is risk informed and is effective. And so we also look at ensuring that what we do as an organisation is appropriate, it's fit for purpose, we have the appropriate capability to do what we need to do, and we use innovation to get there. So a brief picture, this is the structure of the agency. We have Radiation Health Services, which is really radiation research and advice, usually in the biomedical and human environmental space. We have medical radiation services, which is the branch I look after, which is imaging and therapy, and also primary standard supports that. We have a regulatory services branch, which does regulations, you can see. And then we have a couple of supporting offices, which are the Office of Business Support, the Office of CEO, and we also have a General Counsel, because as I'm sure you're aware, we're going to deal with legal issues around a lot of what we do. So in the Australian context, that's Australia. There are 9 jurisdictions, which is 6 states, 2 territories, and the Commonwealth. And each of the jurisdictions is responsible for their own radiation protection capability. Sometimes that formal structure sits within the Department of Health, and sometimes it sits within an Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA. Now, the reasons for those are usually historical, but they are responsible for the regulation of the use of radiation within their jurisdictions, i.e. hospitals, research and industries. And industries in Australia is also mining. There's a lot of mining effort in Australia, and the radiation oversight of that sits within the jurisdictions. Well, also regulates, and that's ARPANCA. So ARPANCA regulates the use of radiation by Commonwealth organisations. So that includes the Opal reactor at ANSTO. We also look after the Australian National University, CSIRO, the Australian Cyclotron, and when nuclear power submarines come, they will have their own regulatory body when that is established. We also have formal advisory bodies. Radiation Health Committee is a statutory body. It's in our legislation that it exists, and it is the primary body for developing policies and draft publications, and all the jurisdictions have representation onto that body. So that's where our codes come from, or come out of. We also have a Radiation Health Expert Reference Panel, or NHealth, which exists at a fairly high level, and that provides advice across the jurisdictions and also directly into the Australian Health Protection Committee, which feeds into the health ministers of all the jurisdictions, so everybody understands and we can look at a nationally consistent approach to the implementation of radiation safety codes and standards. And then we have the Commonwealth bodies that are also part of this, and we really look at Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, because we have safeguards and non-proliferation office. Within the Department of Health and Aged Care, there are 3 bodies in this space. We have ARPANCA, the TGA, who have been presenting today, and ARPRA. Now, ARPRA is the Australian Health Practitioner Regulation Agency, and they have responsibility for ensuring that the medical professionals who work in this space are appropriately trained and qualified. They also have oversight of the training programs, which are offered by various universities, tertiary level education systems, to ensure that they are fit for purpose to train appropriately trained individuals in the space. The Department of Climate Change, Energy, Environment and Water also has a responsibility in this space under the Environment Protection, Diversity and Conservation Act, and of course it will be related to ANSTO. They are a significant licence holder for ARPANCA as they look after the research reactor. And the Australian Radioactive Waste Agency is going to be the body that does have oversight on a low-level waste site when it happens. So talking about international engagement and best practice, ARPANCA represents directly to each one of these organisations. We have membership from across the agency on many of these panels and many of the sub-panels within these larger commissions, for example. We also have the country, Australia. We have international obligations on the Convention of Use of Nuclear Safety, Early Notification Assistance, among others. And we have a number of bilateral MOU agreements across the countries on the bottom right. And this is crudely how it works. We recognise and have membership on all these panels. We review what has been published and what has been put forward as suggestions by these bodies. We have consultation through our various boards and panels to ensure that what is being recommended is fit for purpose in the Australian context. We then engage with the jurisdictions to put together an understanding of what is appropriate, and then this ends up in what's called the National Code, which provides a code for Australia. For example, this one is the Medical Code for Radiation Protection and Medical Exposure. And we also write guides, or we look at writing guides to assist both the regulators and the operators on what the code actually means and how it can be implemented. So just to understand again, in the Australian context, ARPANCA regulates the facility which produces the nuclear medical material, Opal, how they do that by the ANSTO Nuclear Medicine Facility, but also how they store and also dispose of, looking at ANSTO in the Synrock space. I'd now like to throw to my...
Okay.
Peter Thomas.
Thanks everyone. My name is Peter Thomas. I'm head of the medical imaging section within ARPANCA. So really we've had an overview of what ARPANCA does, and we just finished on looking at ANSTO's nuclear medicine production systems and how that falls under ARPANCA's regulation. But of course there are, as we're talking about here, there are other producers of nuclear medicine isotopes which fall under the state and territory jurisdictions. And so the primary vehicles for looking at them from a radiation safety point of view are the codes that are produced through ARPANCA, but in consultation with the states and territories. And so I guess when we're talking about radiopharmaceutical safety, we're talking about chemical and pharmacological safety, which is what the TGA's responsibility is, and they've just talked to that. And then we have the radiation safety side of it. And what I'm sort of emphasising here is the fact that our codes are translations of international best practice. So on the left here, you've got the IAEA International Basic Safety Standards, and the Code for Radiation Protection in Planned Exposure Situations is a translation of that for those specific types of exposure situations. And so this is a general code that would cover any type of business in relation to occupational radiation safety, but also public and environmental radiation safety. So even a hospital would also have to comply with this code in regards to their radiation safety for their staff, and also any shielding related to protection of the public and that sort of thing. So this code would be, although ARPANCA is involved in the development, it's up to the state jurisdictions to then make compliance with the code a condition of licence. So a business like Cyclotron would apply to the state regulator for a licence to undertake the activity that they want to do. And the state would say, okay, yes, we'll grant you a licence, but one of those conditions is that you must comply with the planned exposure code. So, for example, that includes the occupational dose limit of 20 millisieverts per annum and the public dose limit of 1 millisievert per annum. Occupational monitoring is a key part of what's required under the code, but probably the key element is the radiation management plan. And I remember that was mentioned in the discussions yesterday, that much of what, in terms of what actually happens, is tied up in the radiation management plan. So the code is a very general document that applies to almost any kind of business. And so the specific details are then covered in a radiation management plan. So a facility that's quite complex, like, for example, the Peter MacCallum Comprehensive Cancer Centre, would have a very large radiation management plan that covers a whole range of aspects, whereas a dental practice or an X-ray testing business would have a relatively small radiation management plan that would only deal with the areas that are relevant to the kind of work that it does. And so here's the general, the essential bit there that says that the responsible person, that's the licence holder, has to ensure protection and safety. And then the next section says you have to meet the dose limits. And then this section here is the bit that says you have to have an appropriate radiation management plan that meets all the areas in the requirements in the areas you're working in. And these are the standard dose limits and for occupationally exposed and for members of the public. Now then, of course, talking about radiopharmaceuticals, we've got a place that manufactures, but then we need to transport the product from the manufacturer to somewhere else. And so again, there's a national code for the safe transport of radioactive material that again picks up the IAEA transport code SSR6 and applies that in Australia. So again, jurisdictions that would be licensing businesses undertaking transport would say you need to comply with the transport code in order to manage that process. And I remember yesterday Greg was talking about the type A packages that they would use for transport of fluorine-18. Then if you want to dispose of material, now of course for fluorine-18 we're talking about something that's gone pretty much. So it's not really a disposal issue. But of course, for the production facilities, there may be other waste materials that are produced, and certainly for ANSTO at Lucas Heights in making molybdenum-99 for technetium generators. There's a range of waste materials that are produced from that process. And there are actually a number of codes. I've just got the code here for solid radioactive waste. And again, that picks up the IAEA relevant requirements. And then when we turn to the actual use in a medical facility, the actual use in terms of administering the radiopharmaceutical to a patient, that comes under the medical exposure code. So again, the medical exposure code picks up the medical exposure sections of the IAEA basic safety standards. And so a hospital or a nuclear medicine clinic, whether public or private, would have to comply with both the planned exposure code from the point of view of protection of its staff and protection of the public, and then in terms of protection of patients would have to comply with the medical code. And between them, they're covering all of those elements in the IAEA BSS. So again, a radiation management plan is an important part of that. And of course, in the medical exposure code, we've got the justification component where a clinician is authorising a procedure and making a determination that the benefit outweighs the risk for that patient. And then we have the optimisation aspect where the clinical team is ensuring a balance of image quality and dose. And obviously, in a case of a fluorine PET FDG, for example, a procedure, how much activity to administer in order to achieve an image of acceptable quality for the particular diagnostic purpose. And then also there are elements of protection of the public in relation to release of patients. Now, again, this is not really a relevant consideration for an FDG diagnostic procedure, but for a therapeutic procedure, there's again a requirement in the code. So it essentially boils down to that the facility has to make an assessment of ensuring that the release of this patient would not result in more than 1 millisievert to a member of the public. And so that would usually, there's some guidance levels on the measured dose rate at the point of release, which then makes some assumptions about how much exposure a member of the public is likely to get to that patient. So a facility may need to consider holding a patient for a certain period of time until release, and that's certainly been the case, for example, for iodine 131 therapeutic treatments. And I mentioned optimisation, ARPANCA runs a diagnostic reference level program. The link's on the bottom right there. And that does include nuclear medicine. And so this is our nuclear medicine data for whole body F18 FDG. So we surveyed sites. This is from our survey in 2021 and 2022 that informed the diagnostic reference levels that were updated in June of this year. So we had 44 sites provide us with data on the levels of the amount of administered activity for F18 FDG. On the left, you've got it expressed as a weight base, so megabecquerels per kilogram per patient, and on the right is as the total administered activity. So in our case, the interquartile range of administered activity is sort of between about 230 and 270 megabecquerels. And on a weight basis, it's somewhere between 3 megabecquerels per kilogram and 3.5 megabecquerels per kilogram. So our DRLs a weight base of 3.5 megabecquerels per kilogram and a rounded 270 megabecquerels when expressed as a fixed activity. So of course, this is just guidance. This is not a recommendation of what activity to administer, but this gives an indication to facilities of the range of activities administered by their peers for performing a whole body FDG procedure. And I think as in Greg's presentation yesterday, he was showing that the doses that they produce are typically 275 to 300 megabecquerels per administration, but a facility is obviously ordering up a specific requirement for their specific patients. So I think at this point, I'm now swinging back to Ivan to talk again generally about the various things done by the medical branch at ARPANCA.
Thank you, Peter. So you've had a review of the Australian context, how the codes and standards work, some of the key parts within those. And so now I'm just going to talk briefly about how ARPANCA delivers capability into the wider medical field and the regulatory space to assist in really the safe treatment of patients. So we need to recognise that the doses, the space we're looking at, covers from diagnostic imaging to radiotherapy. So we're looking at small doses of radiation with millions of procedures, and radiotherapy where there's large doses of radiation, also using external beam, usually using up to 60 gray, 70 gray over a treatment course. And with modern therapies, we're even looking up to say 20, 24 gray per centimetre fraction. And so within the structure of the branch, we have medical imaging that really looks in the diagnostic imaging space. We have a primary standards dosimetry laboratory, which performs fundamental measurements in both spaces. And then we have the Australian Clinical Dosimetry Service, or ACDS, which performs auditing in the radiotherapy space. It's also worth noting that what we have is really closing the loop of calibration being performed by primary standards and ACDS and even the DRLs to an extent. We're looking at the application of those calibrations to ensure the patient is actually receiving what is being expected. And so we have a DRL program. So it's worth noting that the DRL program really can't exist by itself in a single presentation. And so we have an entire region or area of protocols which are being reviewed in the DRL space, and they are all collated by ARPANCA. We pick up something like 50 to 60% of the national diagnostic imaging dose burden. And you can see that we have the imaging guidance space as well as the nuclear med space. And on the left, we have reporting by CTTI Vol or the DLP who can be to one of it. So this is an example, and again, this is online on the link on the bottom right. So as previously mentioned, we also contribute to the codes and standards. So this is a role of the branch. We obviously have a lot to do with the development of the medical branch, and Peter was effectively the lead author on that, which also means that we engage with all stakeholders in the country. We send out a lot of the emails and the distribution of draft documents. We collect the hundreds upon hundreds of comments. We review them for action. And we end up with Peter with the RHC committee having oversight of preparing the final documents. We also conduct a great deal of education in the space. So we have online radiation protection programs. That's RPOP, radiation protection of the patient, is at the bottom left-hand side. Again, you can look at that online. That is a product developed by ARPANCA for delivery in Australian space to assist operators within Australia delivering the correct amount of radiation to the patient and how to do that. And on the right, we also have the guide for medical imaging, which came out at about the same time, which is a written document which goes out to GP facilities and practitioners for them to read and also to hand out to their patients. So, radiotherapy is used or recommended for something like 40% of all cancer presentations. With modern radiotherapy, it uses highly targeted, sophisticated technology with very high dose levels now, as I mentioned before, which has great risk, but also great reward. And auditing radiotherapy practices is fundamental to ensure that the right dose is being delivered by a facility to the right place. And when we look at modern technology, we now have multiple dimensions of freedom. And by that, I mean the gantry can move while it's delivering. The beam can be triggered on or off. The beam current now can be modified in real time. And on the bottom right, you have a picture of an MLC or a multi-link collimator. And those leaves can each individually move independent of each other or as a group as part of treatment to deliver a highly sculptured radiation dose delivery to the patient. And so ARPANCA, over the last 10 years, has developed an interdisciplinary audit program with increasing complexity across the top level, running from left to right. The optically stimulated luminescence detector with Perspex block on the top left is a remote audit. A set of detectors are packaged up and mailed out to a participating facility. They set up the detector under those conditions, very rigorous, very precise. And then ARPANCA receives the OSLE back again. We read it out, provide a measurement to the facility. And as we move across the right, we go to what's called a level 1B, which is a highly precise measurement in the water tank. We go to a level 2D array, which is a set of irradiations performed by the facility. They map that on their computer planning system, utilizing a CT dataset designed by and sent out by ARPANCA, which tests the capability of the planning system and the linear accelerator to deliver fields which ARPANCA has, again, put together, often from IEA recommendations, to tweak out and tease the potential performance issues in the system. The top far right is what's called a level 3 facility, that's end-to-end. So ARPANCA sends out one of its phantoms, it is CT'd by the facility. They put a plan on it according to the guidelines provided by ARPANCA, and then a team goes out from ARPANCA and measures it. And again, the test is whether the facility is delivering the amount of radiation they think they're delivering in the context of that dose. And we've also talked briefly about different technologies, changing technology in the space. On the bottom left, we have atomotherapy, which is essentially a 6 MV accelerator guide, sometimes a 4 MV, set up in what looks very like a CT housing. And that acceleration device moves around the patient, and the patient moves through the bore of the delivery system. And Ethos is a similar brand new piece of kit that's come out most recently, often for you to be able to be just put into and installed in less shielded rooms because there's more radiation shielding that comes with the instrument itself. On the higher end tech end, we have an MR Linac, very new, very difficult to audit because you have to make sure you don't have any ferrospace materials in your audit phantom. CyberKnife is a short accelerator, often used for brain treatments, and the Gamma Knife is a gamma source, which is used often to irradiate. In fact, many gamma sources mounted in a hemispherical body and used often for brain treatments. Mail out, we've actually used this and assisted a number of countries in our region to ensure that their own radiotherapy delivery system is delivering what they think it's delivering. So OSLD kits have been sent out to Cambodia, Mongolia, Papua New Guinea, a number of other places, and we're interested in collaborating with people on doing this work. The value of the system, particularly after you've been running for a while, is you end up with what we call a national data set, which means we have a very powerful set of data that covers off on every audit which has been conducted by the ACDS using the OSL system across all the Linacs in the country, across all the energies offered. And you can see there the 3 dots represent the 3 dose responses for 3 Linacs in the one facility. So you also get to have an idea about local spread within a given facility, as well as national characteristic. And what it means is that the ACDS doesn't only audit a facility for itself, it also compares it against every other facility in the country. and that creates a very powerful tool. So again, this all sits adjacent to and sort of on top of a primary standards dosimetry laboratory. So ARPANCA has primary standards. We have 3 of them. We have one in the megavoltage space, one in the hard kV, and one in the softer kV. We maintain all of them under authority from the National Meteorological Institute, under which not only maintain these instruments to an appropriate level of quality, but also disseminate them, which means we calibrate chambers sent to us by facilities around the country and a number of internationals to ensure that their fundamental radiation equipment is giving the appropriate reading to appropriate dose. So this is the equipment space we have in the bunkers in the basement of ARPANCA. So LINAC on the top left, control system on the bottom left, and on the right-hand side, the top we have the KV X-ray system, which can, it has IEA filter wheels, so we can produce the IEA spectrum of beams. And we also have a Cobalt 60 system, which is really still the international standard for megavoltage calibration. The world is slowly moving, I think, to using LINACs, but at this point, you can't really have a primary standards laboratory without a functioning cobalt source. So the facility sends in the ionizing chamber for calibration. It's calibrated by the team. We also calibrate the electrometer, and we end up with a dosimetry calibration sheet on the right there, and that's all MARTA certified. We ensure that our primary standard is working appropriately by frequent comparison formal through BIPM and CIPM, but also we conduct a number of informal comparisons with secondary standards and laboratory standard laboratories around the world. We also run education systems in practical reference dosimetry. This is the course that was run in 2023. This is for participants. It runs out of our headquarters at Melbourne in Yalandi, which is about 30 kilometres east of here. And we get international participants in this. And this is really aimed at an early stage medical physicist who is midway through their training or even towards the end of their training to ensure that they understand what dosimetry is about and how to perform it safely and accurately when they are in the radiotherapy clinic. We are running one next year. It is pretty much completely booked out, because we get a lot of people coming from not only Australia, but also, as I said, a lot of environments. So thank you.
Thank you, Ivan and Peter. It's a very detailed explanation regarding the ARPANCA. So before I give the question and answer to the floor, I'd like to clarify that ARPANCA is not only making the guideline and supervising, but you provide also the consultancy and training. Yeah. So it's a
we do offer some of those services. We're not the only. So there are radiology or business training businesses who do that. But yes, we do provide
so it's comprehensive
training services.
Okay, good. I think it's the key point that we need to be benchmarked in Indonesia. And then the second is, do you apply the same standards between the GMP and the non-GMP facilities?
So the short answer is yes, but again, it's not really us; it's the state and territory jurisdictions. But yeah, the GMP is really about a production, a chemical safety thing, which is really the TGA's responsibility. Radiation safety is really only interested in, is the business operating safely, both in relation to its staff and also protection of the public. And in that case, that overall generic requirements apply, regardless of whether.
So it's the same standard here. And then the third, how about the who made the guidelines of the transportation safety? Is coming from the ARPANCA or other department?
So I might need you to...
The transportation of the radiopharmacy, the safety.
The safety for the transportation.
Oh, for the transportation. Yes. So again, there's the transport code.
Yeah.
So that is again developed through the Radiation Health Committee by ARPANCA in consultation with the states and territories. And again, the code is then applied by the
State.
states and
By the
territories.
state.
Yeah,
But you make the guidelines, the national guidelines.
Yes.
Okay, great, understand. Before I give it to the online participant, you have a point to raise, Pak Kus.
Okay. Thank you very much. My name is Nanta. I am from Nuclear Engineering, Gajah Mada University in Yogyakarta, namely about 600 kilometers from Jakarta. Related to the sometimes if we have new equipment, for example, PET CT or cyclotron, to operate first, they should have license or certificate for the operation, so that there is safely operation during production of the radioisotope ARPANCA and so on, and to the patient.
Yep.
How long time you will give the license for this new equipment that will be operated?
So it basically falls to the states and territories because a facility would obtain a piece of equipment or propose to obtain a piece of equipment, and they would say to their jurisdictional regulator, you know, this is what I am intending to do, and then the regulator is trying to make a decision about whether or not to grant them a license to do that. Now, so if it's a CT scanner, then they are used to licensing CT scanners, and they would go, okay, yes, that's just another CT scanner. But if it's a new kind of piece of equipment, then that jurisdiction would then have to make an evaluation of, you know, exactly what requirements are going to be applied, and, you know, how do we make an assessment. Now, through ARPANCA and the RHC, there is the ability for the states and territories to cooperate with each other, so that a jurisdiction can ask the other jurisdictions, you know, have you had to license such a piece of equipment before? What standards did you apply? And in general, where a piece of equipment has a relevant ISO or IEC standard, that would normally be one of the things that's kind of part of licensing. So if the equipment has, for example, a CE mark from Europe or some equivalent FDA, like US FDA approval, then those kind of considerations would be taken into account by the state territory regulators. But it's not something that ARPANCA itself evaluates.
I'm sorry. Second question regarding to the safety officer, especially to control the dose of the radiation process, radiation marker in the facility. Is there qualification for the credit studies and so on, or for the expertise and so on, and then there is a license for the person that is up in this action? Yeah.
So short answer is I don't think so. Again, it's a state and territory. So the code simply says that it's a requirement for the license holder to have access to qualified expertise to advise them in meeting the requirements of the code. So there's no, and so usually the states and territories would therefore then expect a license holder to nominate a radiation safety officer, and different states and territories may have specific requirements about who can be an RSO, and there do exist training courses in different industrial settings. So ANSTO, for example, offers radiation safety officer training at a number of different levels. So they have they have a level that's more for sort of like general safety, and then ones that are more involved, that involve contamination monitoring, for example. So if you were going to be a radiation safety officer in a nuclear medicine department where there might be radioactive material, you know, unsealed radionuclides being spilled and so forth, and you would need to be involved in cleanup, then they might expect you to have that sort of level of training. Whereas if you were in like a veterinary X-ray facility with only X-ray equipment, then you might have a different level of safety. So largely that's set by the states and territories, and does vary between the states and territories.
Clear? Thank you. Clear. Okay. So I give the chance to the online participant. Are there any participant from Bapeten?
No, I think.
If somebody from Bapeten, can you raise your hand if you want to ask a question or give the comment? Pak Dwi from Bapeten, are you there? Or I give the chance to everyone online. You have something to ask. You can do it also by chat or bahasa Indonesia, so I can translate it to you. No? Okay, meanwhile, we are waiting. Probably from Bepom, do you have any other question or comment? Yeah. Although you are focused on the GMP, but I think safety is probably one of the dimensions, I think. No? Clear enough? Okay.
One question.
Go ahead, Pak Kus.
That's what regarding to the calibration of the equipment. How you control the main equipment that is with here? Now the this equipment outlet to be code for the calibration.
Yeah, so again, it's largely controlled by the states and territories. There are compliance testing requirements for equipment.
Compliance testing.
That's right. But then also there's the measurement devices that the compliance testing businesses would use. So there's a range of compliance testing services. So here in Victoria, for example, most of it is done by private companies. And so if maybe you missed the opportunity yesterday to ask the state regulator, but they have an approved list. So if you want to be a compliance tester in Victoria, then you must apply to the Victorian radiation regulator and say, you know, I want to do this, and they have requirements that you have to meet. And then there's a compliance testing standard. And in fact, at the moment, the RHC is trying to harmonise the compliance testing requirements across all states and territories. Most of them are pretty much the same. One of the biggest issues more was the frequencies. Like some states would have, say, 2 years or 1 year or 3 years for different types of equipment. In other states, there are examples. For example, in Queensland, in their public hospitals, there is a group within Queensland Health called Biomedical Technology Services. So they're kind of like an in-house physics group who would do testing for all the public hospitals. But then there would be private consultants doing the other types of facilities. So yeah, so usually each state and territory would have a requirement for the compliance testers to be licensed. And one of the conditions would be that their measurement equipment is calibrated every certain period. In most cases, that would mean that the business is sending, so for example, in X-rays, a lot of businesses would be using modern solid-state multimeter devices. Some would be using ion chamber type devices. And typically those solid-state multimeter devices would need to be sent back to the manufacturer for testing and for calibration and checking. We do have the ability, we have a facility to do the calibration for the dose reading compared to the primary standard. And we do have a few sites who do use us, but I think most of them would send it to the manufacturer for periodic testing.
Thank you.
Okay, I think no question from online participant.
I remember one question.
Oh yeah, yes, go ahead.
So, do you have also a role and responsibility in radiopharmaceutical that's imported?
Yes, that's good. Thank you for reminding me.
How you deal with it?
Because so our particular role is just because the importation of a radioactive substance is prohibited by our Customs Act unless the person organising the shipment has permission from the CEO of ARPANCA. And so my section handles import permits for medical radioisotopes. In fact, within the agency, because you can import radioisotopes for other purposes, for example, for industrial radiography, and so we have a division, we have the regulatory services branch looks after importations for non-medical uses, and we look after importations for medical uses. And there's a little bit of a grey area sometimes. So, for example, brachytherapy wire, iridium brachytherapy wire, we would issue a permit for it, whereas iridium for industrial radiography would be done by the regulatory branch, and also importation of really high activity sources such as cobalt-60 for something like a gamma knife. Although it's medical use, it's a category 1 source from a security point of view, and so there's an extra overlay for those category 1 and category 2 sources that's handled by our regulatory services branch from a security point of view. So we would handle the iridium brachytherapy wire as a category 3 and not particularly subject to onerous security requirements. And then most of the other importations would be category 4 and 5. So things like, I think they mentioned, TJ mentioned some iodine sources like iodine 123, MIBG, comes in from Japan. There are some, when ANSTO has a problem with its molybdenum generation and they need to import technetium generators from another supplier, then they would come to us. Lutetium, so there's lutetium made by ANSTO, but then there's lutetium that's imported, and so we would issue permits for that. And so in our case, so we're just handling the importation from the point of view of the Customs Act, so issuing a permit. So a person wanting to import iridium brachytherapy wire, for example, would apply to us for approval. We would then note which state or territory that had come from, and we would forward the application to the state or territory radiation regulator and ask them, is the recipient appropriately licensed? And then when the state or territory says yes, we would then go ahead and issue the import permit. And then when the shipment arrives, the freight forwarder would, Customs would say to the freight forwarder, where's your permit from ARPANCA? And we would have sent that to the applicant and their shipping agents, and they would then produce it and then the importation has happened. And from that point on, it's then the responsibilities of the states and territory. Well, there's a bit of a grey area there because there's the transport process from where it's arrived, if it's come off a plane before it actually gets to the end user. But it's then under the regulatory control of that jurisdiction. So, and also, I guess, when it comes to radiopharmaceuticals, so we would ask whether or not it has been listed on the ARTG, the region, so whether that's an approved medicine. In a lot of cases, what's actually being imported is the isotope itself, the raw product, which the TGA doesn't require. When they went through their list of things, the actual raw isotope is considered, part of the ingredients of the final product. And so it itself doesn't have to be listed on the ARTG. But we would usually be asking, is it either listed or is it coming in under one of these special access arrangements? So like it's a clinical trial, or one of the special access arrangements relates to patients near the end of life where there's like a palliative treatment. And so if the patient is not expected to live for a very long period of time, that's again a special access provision.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much, Ivan and Peter, for your sharing to us. It's a very fruitful one. Hope we can, if we need another information, hope you can connect with us. Thank you, and give time for Professor Lakso to have a closing remark for the webinar, probably. Over to you.
Okay. Thank you. I think I will speak in bahasa Indonesia first. Okay. Ya, terima kasih Bapak Ibu semua yang ada di Indonesia. Jadi pada hari ini kita sudah masuk pada satu bahasan yang cukup menantang bagi kita semua di Indonesia, adalah mengenai regulasi ya. Regulasi yang regulasi yang sangat menarik untuk kita bahas. Dan dari pertemuan yang ada di Australia ini, kita mendapatkan suatu, saya pribadi impresi bahwa regulasi yang ada itu mendengarkan kebutuhan apa yang dibutuhkan oleh pasien. Jadi seperti tadi kita lihat dari mulai logistik pengiriman barang yang hati-hati tadi, kemudian apa yang di PMP dan juga ada yang di proteksi tadi, itu memang memungkinkan kebutuhan untuk kesehatan tadi bisa berjalan, tapi tetap mengutamakan apa yang kita sebut sebagai keamanan dan mutu lainnya. Nah, ini yang akan menjadi satu PR kita semua, karena kalau kita tidak masuk ke regulasi ini, jangan-jangan masih ada satu semacam aturan yang Cyclotron hanya boleh satu rumah sakit misalnya. Ya, sekarang seperti itu ya. Cyclotron hanya satu rumah sakit, ya. GMP di rumah sakit itu harus seperti yang ada di industri misalnya. Ya, itu seperti itu ya. Nah, ini kita akan lihat sebagai satu bahan yang menarik. Nah, saya memang ada di Kemenkes dan tapi juga saya sebagai salah kaki di UGM ya. Itu berharap pada pusat studi industri farmasi dan teknologi kesehatan untuk terus mengawal isu regulasi ini supaya ada perkembangan yang lebih sesuai dengan kebutuhan pasien di Indonesia dan pengembangan teknologi seperti ini. Kalau regulasi tidak diatur seperti model yang di Australia yang sudah terbukti selama 25 tahun itu dengan baik, itu kita mungkin akan 5 tahun lagi, 10 tahun lagi akan tetap sama seperti ini ya, yang kita alami. Ya. Oke, saya kira demikian dan terima kasih sekali pada Bu Dirjen, Bu Rizka, dan teman-teman di Kementerian Kesehatan, kemudian juga teman-teman di Bapeten yang ada di sini dan juga di rumah sakit ini saya banyak pihak yang masuk ke sini ya. Dan saya berharap bahwa teman-teman nanti akan menyambung dengan meeting kita yang akan datang ya. Jadi pasca kunjungan di Melbourne kita akan bertemu lagi dengan diskusi di Jogja ataupun di Jakarta untuk membahas hasil ini. Tapi tentunya dengan PR besar untuk memperbaiki sistem atau ekosistem Cyclotron dan PET scan yang ada di Indonesia. Termasuk kemungkinan PET scan ada di layanan primer. Saya kira ini yang disampaikan dan semua bahan ada di website www.industriobat.alkes.net yang bisa diakses oleh teman-teman semua. Sekian dan terima kasih dan mari kita tepuk tangan untuk we thank for the courtesy of the Cyclotech to host this meeting, this very important meeting, and also from the I forget the long names of the protection agency for radiation, ARPANCA. ARPANCA is the name of car. Very popular. ARPANCA. Yeah. It's a very long name, and all of the parties that support this activity. Thank you very much, and see you again in the next meeting. Selamat ketemu lagi. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.